With the release of the Canon R5 Mark II, the circle is complete. The big three now all have a high-resolution, high-speed stacked flagship body. So does Sony still make the best camera for photography? Sony might be an industry giant in other technological areas, but in imaging and photography, they were the underdog. Canon has spent 90 years building a loyal global customer base. Over the past 15 years, Sony has tried every trick in the book across 3 phases of product cycles to try and dethrone Canon. And if you come at the king, you best not miss. Today let's talk about what the Canon R5 II can tell us about the future of the Sony A1 II, including 4 Canon features Sony needs to beat, 1 feature I hope they'll beat, and why when it eventually comes out, you shouldn't buy it. Hello, I'm Jack, scientist by day, street photographer by night, and this is Bokeh Therapy. I'm a Sony shooter. Shot with all the current gen Sony bodies including the A1. But 2 years ago I had the A7 IV. It wasn't cheap, but nowhere near as expensive as the A1, and I was the underdog shooting with a tool that punches well above its weight. And I got some amazing images shooting with cheap third-party lenses, but I couldn't stop thinking about the A1. Unparalleled set of features and crazy high price tag was the elephant in the room for Sony shooters. Eventually I upgraded, not just the camera but to the best G Master lenses, but strangely it's because of how great the A1 was that for the first time in a long time, now I don't own any Sony cameras. This video isn't sponsored, but thank you to Zhiyun for sending me the Molus G300 for testing, and to Audio for the music in this video. They provided a 70% discount code for channel viewers, but these brands had no input into the production of this video. They don't get to see it before it goes live, and as always, I have final edit. I'm filming this before the official announcement, but according to Canon rumors, the R5 II will have a fully stacked 45 megapixel sensor. They've had 5 years to come up with this, and the resolution doesn't seem higher than Nikon or Sony, so I'm guessing it's really fast. Faster scanning than the A1, maybe faster than the Z or Z9. Nope. I got invited to join the Ordinary Filmmakers live stream for the Canon R5 II announcement, but the last time I was on the live stream, my lighting was too dark. I asked Zhiyun to send me the G300 Molus to help fix this problem. It's a 300 watt light, which is super powerful, but you can see it's got a tiny footprint and it's really flat. It's only 1.5 kilos. Off a reflector against the ceiling can soften up and raise the ambient exposure in the whole room and make my live stream setup look a little bit more polished. That's better. Now I'm ready to join the live stream over on Ordinary Filmmaker. Oh, the live stream's over, the official specs are out, and the R5 II has finally caught up at the fraction of the A1 launch price. Short of moving to a global shutter, the A1 II won't be able to wow us with speed alone anymore. But how it processes the data generated by all that speed may be what sets it apart. The A1 II needs to add pre-capture, 50 megapixel raw images as soon as you half press the shutter, but instead of 30 or 40 FPS blackout-free shooting, make it 120 frames per second. Sure, this is one of the A9 III's standout features, and if it happened, the A1 II would immediately leapfrog the A9 III by shooting 50 megapixel images, but it wouldn't be the first time Sony's killed their darlings. In October 2013, Sony announced not 1, but 2 full-frame mirrorless cameras, their first-gen A7 and A7R. Other than minor differences in build quality, the main differentiator was resolution and low light performance. This was a peek into Sony's first strategy to dethrone Canon, choice overload. Then a short 6 months later, Sony shocked the industry with the A7S, a massive 3-stop improvement in high ISO performance with a low-res sensor. As the underdog, Sony had no choice. They needed every bit of attention and all the innovation to put a dent in Canon's lead, so what was Canon up to on the other end? It would take Canon another 5 years to launch the EOS R, but it didn't have to be groundbreaking. By Canon's own admission, it was not designed to replace their DSLRs because they're not the underdog, but rather the top of the food chain. There was no need for them to eat their own. The second feature of the R5 II that the Sony A1 II will need to beat is video. I get it if you don't care about video, but for the live stream I just finished or work Zoom meetings, to sell in today's market, even entry-level cameras need great video features. The R5 II can shoot 8K 60, so the A1 II should as well, but if Sony's looking for the headline, 4K 240, the cinematographers and DPs on film sets on that live stream seem to have a use for it, and no other camera is doing it. Of course, the higher video quality captured at the fastest frame rates translates into photo as well, and that was the main selling point that sold me on the original A1. It can shoot 8K means there's plenty of megapixels, a fast scanning stack sensor, electronic shutter only, and silent shooting. This fixed all of my gripes with the A7 IV, no more loud shutter, a tilt rather than a flip screen, and the dreaded 1.5 times crop in 4K 60 is gone. But when I finally upgraded, my shooting experience downgraded. This should be Sony's best of the best, their flagship pro body, and I felt an imperceptible pressure creeping in. From that point on, what I create had to be worthy of this pro grade tool. Shooting stopped being fun because I wasn't the underdog anymore. Now that the live stream's finished, I'm going to use the G300 in a different setup. Normally for my key light in this small office space, I use a really flat Amaran LED light tubes that are against the wall. But unless you're really close to the light source, it's very harsh. So instead of the reflector, I'm going to use a large light dome 2 from Aputure. And this light has a Bowens mount, so it will still fit. And now I get very soft lighting. Right now there's 2 layers of diffusion and the grid over the Zhiyun G300. When I turn it on, it's just 1%. See, it's nice and bright and soft. And this is at 1%. So really powerful for low light situations. And the third Canon R5 II feature that Sony needs to beat is how it handles low light performance. Surprise? It's AI, a new neural network for up to 2 stops of noise reduction apparently for raw files in camera. I'm curious to see how quick this is, how big the file sizes are, and how much heat it generates because Adobe Lightroom's AI denoise feature already demands too much of my computer and my storage. Can Sony achieve the same low light performance without AI? There is some precedent here. The A7R5 has the same 61 megapixel sensor as the A7R4, but with a new processor it was able to improve low light performance by about 1 to 2 stops. So it might be able to happen in the A1 II without AI. The third generation of Sony's A7 lineup put the world and the industry on notice. They shifted to the second phase of the strategy to dethrone Canon, optimize and stabilize. The A7 III now came with 2 card slots, IBIS, a bigger battery, a full-frame pro camera for under $2,000. Battery life overheating warnings were a thing of the past, and Sony even gave those cameras real-time autofocus tracking via a firmware update. But nothing showcased Sony's strategy of refining a stable product line more than the back-to-back releases of the Canon R5 and the Sony A7S III. Canon's high-res sensor led to uncontrolled overheating, whereas Sony's A7S III went all in on a lower-res sensor to give stable and usable 4K 120. The student had become the master. Sony wasn't the underdog anymore. The fourth feature the A1 II needs to beat the Canon R5 II in is IBIS. Canon claims an average of about 8 stops, which matches the rest of the industry, which also leaves the A1 with its 5 stops of IBIS in the dust. With the A1 II, Sony should throw out some ridiculous number, 10 stops of IBIS. Smoother handheld video and longer exposures than anyone else, customizable settings to differentiate stabilization settings for stationary shots versus panning or tilting shots, and a slider to minimize any corner IBIS wobble for the lenses you're using. Eliminate the perception that Sony IBIS is underpowered once and for all, because IBIS is one of the reasons I no longer own any Sony cameras. On the A1, shooting with an 85mm lens, unless I was standing completely still on the streets, I couldn't consistently shoot slower than 1/100th of a second. The A7R5 launched with 8 stops. The much cheaper A7C II had 7 stops, and the cracks were starting to show in my A1. That's when I realized Sony's third strategy to dethrone Canon would leave a bad taste in my mouth: planned obsolescence. The A1, even with its $6,000 price tag, was never meant to last more than a year. It sounds crazy. It combined the speed of the A9 II with the resolution and video features of the A7R5 and A7S III, but they still need you to buy those other cameras. Canon supported their R5 shooters with so many firmware updates, those overheating concerns are a thing of the past, and Nikon just this week released updates to their first gen Z6 and Z7. How about Sony? Even basic upgrades. Focus breathing compensation on the A7 IV took years to make it to the A1, and all the bugs this update created just goes to show how under-resourced this part of Sony's engineering team has always been. Keep existing customers happy just isn't their priority. This is the reason they still haven't overtaken Canon, because the last feature that Sony needs to beat the R5 Mark II in is brand loyalty. During that live stream, I was surrounded by so many Canon shooters talking about their love of the colors, the quality of the files, and how future-proof their cameras have been and will continue to be. Even the R5 Mark I is still a fantastic camera, and even if the R5 Mark II is only an incremental upgrade, all the Canon shooters I spoke to were either either upgrade straight away or are willing to wait. We'll use Sony cameras because they have the specs we need, a workhorse that gets the job done, but there's nothing romantic about these machines. Sony needs to establish a deeper connection with its user base, starting with regular firmware support, yes, but also maybe build up S-Cinetone to create proprietary film emulation looks in camera. A sleeker aesthetic wouldn't hurt, more premium materials with an industrial or retro design like the FX3. Sony's not the underdog anymore. They've killed a few too many darlings, and this is a textbook example on how not to build customer loyalty. I decided to sell my A1 the day the A7CR was announced. A smaller body, high resolution, better IBIS at half the price. Sure, there were some downgrades, a louder shutter, a slower sensor, only one SD card slot, but now I felt like an underdog again. Shooting was light, fun, a smaller camera less conspicuous on the streets, but last month I sold the A7CR as well. It doesn't mean I've switched systems, I still have all my E-mount glass. I'm excited about the A1 too, not because I'll buy one, but to see how its features will bleed into the lower end models and ultimately make it obsolete. Sony needs to recapture that underdog magic, and until then I'll sit and wait. And thank you to Dennis Jr. 9 for supporting the last video. I'm really excited for the next one. My first impressions of Nikon's 35mm f1.4 will be here when it's ready to go. I'm Jack, capturing peace in every moment.